Talks in Qatar around renewing the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas have stalled. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered his negotiators to return home. Hamas, which has been designated a terrorist organisation by multiple countries, has told the media it will not release more hostages until all Palestinian prisoners held by Israel are released. Israel stepping up airstrikes on southern Gaza, where it told Palestinian civilians to flee to during the first phase of the war.
The truce is over and the bombardments have resumed. Despite international calls for a renewed ceasefire, Israeli forces are pushing ahead with their mission to destroy Hamas. Israel says these airstrikes were targeted at Hamas underground infrastructure, a command centre and a military compound. But the UN has warned of a catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, with hospitals once again struggling to cope.
A lasting ceasefire must be implemented. The alternative is unthinkable for people who are, as a Palestinian said to me, already living in a nightmare. Inaction, at its core, is an approval of the killing of children. But here we are. The bomb started just a few seconds after the ceasefire.
According to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry, casualties among Palestinians have mounted since the end of the truce. The UN Health Agency says less than half of Gaza's hospitals are even partially functional, and the bed capacity is just a fraction of what is needed. Around 80% of Gazans are now displaced, the UN says, and at the moment there's no sign of the truce restarting.
Our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters, joins us from Tel Aviv. Welcome, Rebecca. Let's start with that withdrawal of Israeli negotiators from Qatar. What's going on?
Yeah, well, hopes that this truce, this temporary ceasefire might be able to be resumed quickly were dashed when the Israeli Prime Minister's office actually withdrew the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency negotiators who were in Doha to speak with Qatari and Egyptian officials. And we know that Qatar and Egypt have played a very big role in the negotiations, particularly with this latest large the negotiations, that they played a really big role, that the Israeli Prime Minister's office did pull those Israeli negotiators back. So those hopes now dashed. But of course, these talks have and down throughout the last 8 or so weeks. So there is, of course, still hope that they may be able to begin again. But for the moment, it looks like a resumption of the ceasefire, of the truce. Won't go ahead, with the Israelis saying that Hamas didn't stand by the agreement, that they didn't release all the women and children that they said they were going to. Of course, that ceasefire came to an end rather abruptly, both sides blaming the other for the end of that ceasefire. But of course, still hope remains, and certainly where I'm standing here tonight, Phil, hope remains among the remaining hostages, as all the people that have come out here for those people and the hostages still in Gaza, that those talks will soon resume.
And those people behind you, Rebecca, that was a protest, I understand, demanding the release of more hostages. Is there much public pressure for another truce to allow more hostages to be freed?
Well, there's certainly a lot of public pressure for the rest, the remaining hostages to be released. That's exactly what the people here behind me, and there are many thousands of people here tonight, Phil. The main event is now coming to an end. We're slowly starting to see people dissipate. It was a pretty big event this evening, and people here really calling for those hostages to be released. Now, whether or not they want another temporary truce or a temporary ceasefire really depends on who you speak to. I certainly spoke to people tonight who said that, war is not the answer, that we call for a political solution to this situation, that we want desperately these people to come home, to be brought back to Israel, but that the continuation of the ground operation and the bombing isn't the way to go. But that isn't the majority opinion, I would say. Certainly more people I spoke to this evening, and certainly what we see in media and we speak to people across the country, there's a lot of support for both the ground operation and the bombardment of the Gaza Strip among Israelis. I would say that the majority of people support the aims of completely demolishing Hamas. That is what Israel is saying that they're trying to achieve, to make sure that Hamas is no longer an entity that is able to cause terror or cause havoc within Israel. And that's certainly something that the majority of Israelis support, and many of the people that I spoke to here tonight, they say that in the beginning they were calling for a ceasefire, that they wanted a ceasefire to allow, of course, for the hostages to come out, and they didn't necessarily agree with a ground operation, but that their opinions have changed, that they said that the calls for ceasefire didn't produce any results. What produced results and what produced the hostage releases was, in fact, the continued bombardment and the ground operation.
Okay, thanks for that, Rebecca. Rebecca Ritters in Tel Aviv.
The truce is over. The fighting has already resumed, and hope for many in Gaza is gone.
There's nothing left to fear. Our houses are gone. Our property is gone. Our money is gone. Sons have been martyred. Some died, and some left disabled in the hospital. What's left to cry for? And then they tell us we'll get aid. Where is it?
The war has seen entire Palestinian families wiped out. Many have been displaced multiple times, like those in this makeshift camp near a hospital in Khan Yunis. They say no place is safe, with Israeli bombs dropping everywhere. So some are ignoring Israel's calls for them to move further south. And they're staying put.
In the first shelling, they told us to evacuate to the south because it's safe. Now they tell us to go further south. This is nonsense. We're not going anywhere. We'll remain here, and they can do whatever they please.
Israel says it has struck 400 Hamas targets in 24 hours, including what it says were a command center and military compound. But it denies claims that there are no safe places to evacuate to in Gaza.
We've shared these areas with the international community, with the UN, with other humanitarian organizations, because we urge that in those temporary safer zones, that there be a maximum effort to supply to the people who have relocated there with food, with shelter, with medicine, with field hospitals and so forth.
The UN is warning of a catastrophic humanitarian situation without a ceasefire. Hospitals are again struggling to cope. Less than half are even partially functional. But at the moment, there is no sign of the truce restarting, as Israel has pulled its negotiator out of the Qatar ceasefire talks.
So how are people in Gaza trying to keep safe? I asked Hajem Belusha, who's a journalist in Jordan, who used to report from Gaza and is in touch with many on the Strip.
That's the big problem and the big question for the ordinary people in Gaza, the civilians. They were asked to evacuate east of Khan Yunis to the west or to the Rafah city. Some of the people in Gaza, in Jabalia or in Shijaiya were asked to move to other places in the city, but there were airstrikes in different places, like in Khan Yunis, in east of Khan Yunis. They were moved to the city of Khan Yunis in the west, and today there were intense airstrikes all the day in the west part of Khan Yunis. In Rafah, there was a lot of airstrikes as well. So people all the time wondering where to go. Like just moments ago, I was chatting with a friend who's from Deir al-Balah, and he was asking me, where should I go, if there is a safe place or less dangerous place that I should go. I said, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there is a safe place. And this is what the people asking about all the time.
And so what sort of warnings are people in Gaza getting from the Israeli military?
Actually, the Israeli military is using different platforms, whether they are sharing these informations on social media platforms, which is very limited access to the people because the internet is very limited in Gaza. It's poor network connection, and limited people are able to access to the internet. The other tool is like they are calling people with recorded messages. Sometimes it's not going through. Some people hear it and they drop leaflets on different areas. But the people hear about it from here and there, and a lot of rumors sometimes are spreading. There was a map was shared yesterday by Israeli army online. I mean, how to divide the areas of Gaza Strip to different blocks or different zones. But it's not easy for the people to understand where to go or how to go.
That's journalist Hajim Balusha speaking to me earlier.